Well, I have with me today Eugene Nowlan from Miramichi-Uganda. And Eugene, you and I have talked a lot about Miramichi-Uganda, and there's a lot of things going on there that I would like for the rest of the community to know about. So tell me a little bit about Miramichi-Uganda and when it started, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So can I take you back before that for a second?
Sure.
Because sometimes we want to say, why we're doing something like this. And as North American Christians, we only give about 2.6%. That's all we average.
You mean 2.6% of what we make?
Of what we make.
Okay.
But the majority...
Overall.
But there's only 2% of the 2.6% that we send to somebody else other than keeping it internal.
Right. And that's what Miramichi-Uganda is.
And that's what Miramichi-Uganda is focusing on, to help. What we do is go someplace else in the world and try and make a difference.
Right.
And sometimes when we think about that, we really don't understand what we have here. We absolutely don't understand. Because one day I was on a plane, and I was reading a book, and what it said was, here in North America, we eat for pleasure. And when I first read that, I said, no, I have to eat every day. But every day, you and I, we all decide what we're going to eat. When we get up in the morning, we decide, are we going to have toast? We're going to have tea, we're going to have coffee, we're going to have water. We go to the next meal, we decide what we're going to eat.
Right.
In places like where we're dealing with in Uganda, they eat to keep themselves from starving. So it's very different. And the difference is, even when we don't eat a lot, it's still called pleasure because we're not starving to death.
Their decision is if they're going to eat, and ours is what we're going to eat.
And that's a huge difference.
Right.
And sometimes we say, well, why can't they just help themselves? But without an education, they have a very hard job. And I'll give you a couple of examples. If they want to buy a vehicle, a vehicle that costs them $6,000 or $7,000 for a used vehicle.
Right.
But they're making $2 a day.
Oh.
And so there's no connection there without an education that they can move on to something else. But so these are just some things, because over the years people have said, well, why can't they just do something to help themselves? At what they can make on a daily wage, they can eke out an existence. But if they wanted to build a house and put a window in it, a window will cost them $100 or $200. There's just no connection between what's available.
It'd be 200 days' work.
Yeah. So these are a few of the little things we have to understand.
So how did you get started with Miramichi-Uganda?
Miramichi-Uganda, the very basis of it started. There's some people old enough to remember when Eugene was in power in Uganda.
Like in?
And he cleaned out the middle class.
Yes.
He annihilated the middle class in Uganda. And one of those individuals, when he fled the country, came to study in the U.S.
Okay.
And as he was studying in the U.S., he connected with, or he was friends with a pastor who came to Sunny Corner later to be a minister.
Yes.
And through that there was a connection, and that was a way back. That was in the 1980s. And through that connection, at that time we sent 2 or 3 containers. We at the Miramichi Mall, we filled containers. We sent them to Uganda.
I remember that. There was a tractor on those containers.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we sent containers. And that was sort of the beginning. And then it actually is 32 years ago, a guy by the name of James Yiga came to Miramichi to study for 6 months.
Now, was he connected to?
He was connected. Kefa Sampanji was the name of the gentleman who had studied first.
Okay.
but him and James Yeager were connected. And James at that time had the vision to start outside of the city of Kampala to start a school and the grow a school. And so when James came to study, we started doing what we could to help. And over those 32 years, from the time James left, his school was set up. And this is a fact that I think we had talked about before, but there was over 14,600 school years of education. That's pretty hard.
14,000. So if it was one kid, it would be 14,000 years.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of children.
A lot of children over a long period of time. And while these children were in school, and we'll talk about some other things, but while these children were in school, one key thing that they got every day was a meal. And
why?
Because a lot of them, that was the only meal that they were going to get that day.
Wow.
So, in some children, there was up to 50 at times that actually stayed at the school because they had no place else to go. So as we think of all those...
So was it a building built for this?
There's no orphanage built, but there's school. We built classrooms.
Yeah.
And in the classrooms, the children we have a bed. They would have a rubber mat.
And why would they not go home?
Because there was some of them would go home to a grandparent. Some of them would go home to maybe parents, but very needy. Others just had nobody. We got to remember when we talked about EDMM, but we also got to talk about the AIDS, we'll call it pandemic.
Yeah. Because
when AIDS cleaned out a whole class of people in Uganda.
So it left a lot of children without parents.
So if we want to bring when we talk about 14,600, it's a big number, but if we want to bring that back, anybody here in Miramichi, if they drive by the Max Aiken School,
right,
or they drive by the King Street School, those two schools, that's roughly, there's about we have about between 400 and 500 pupils, students every year in school. So if you drive by either one of those schools, that's how many children are involved every year in the school system. Now, when we think of that, James was here one time, and he looked at the school and he said, "How many children are here?" And I told him, and he said, "An awful big school for so few children."
Yes, parent or teacher-child ratio might be different too.
Yeah. So as we started, that's how we really got connected. 32 years ago, the school was set up, and we went forward a little bit, so we're back up now. And as we started the school, the intent was to give them an education. The intent was that they would hear the gospel, and the intent was that they wouldn't go hungry. They would at least get one meal. So
this James Yeager, is he a teacher? Is he a pastor?
James is a pastor. He's a teacher. And in Kampala, the city, he was a city councilor.
Okay.
So James is a very well-rounded individual.
Right.
And a funny little situation in all this, when we first brought James here to study, we sort of thought we were going to teach James something. When James spent 6 months here, James taught us a lot. So
yes.
Yeah.
A lot about faith, eh?
A lot about faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have some stats. Tell me a few of them.
One of the key, some of the stats are, well, we talked about the 14,600 and some children. That was up until the last year. We also...
That's children years.
No, sorry. Children years, yes.
Right.
Sorry that we don't get that mixed up.
Yeah.
Because there's 400 to 500 children each year in the school system.
Right. And how many years has it been going on?
It's been going 30 plus years, yeah.
Well.
So if we take that, we now have a vocational school also that when the children were coming out of school, if they didn't go further with an education into a university or technical school someplace else, then they were sort of getting lost. So we started a vocational school, and every year we have between 30 and 40 children that now learn a trade, an electrical trade, tailoring, computers. We have a carpentry. So this gives them a chance to further their skills so they can make themselves more employable.
So you start with grade 1?
Grade 1. We do, our key focus was at the primary level.
Right.
So when you look at either the King Street or the other, the primary level. Then from that, we send a number of children out to secondary schools, and then we have a vocational school where we send children to. And every year now, there's about 5 or 6 students that we send through university. So a couple of years ago, we had students that started in the school, in the primary school, come out of that, went to someplace else, furthered their education. Some of them we supported. They went all the way through university. When they come out of university, they came back to the school in Nakatokolo and taught.
Wow.
So that was pretty special.
It is. It's really
that
special.
You take a child that couldn't afford an education, you start them at a primary level, and someday you sponsor them to get through university, and they come back to the school that they started in and taught.
So the vocational school teach carpentry and 2 or 3 other things. Is there industries that you've got going there too? Or?
What we done when we started, because many years ago, I was at a conference one time and it said, please never start something that you can't see it continuing.
Right.
Because you've only taken people and you up their expectations, and then you leave them.
Almost made their misery worse.
Almost made their misery worse.
Yeah.
So what we've done when we first started, we have a plan where we started, what are some key things that can help fund and support the school? So we started a chicken farm. And the building for the chicken farm is big enough to house 5,000 chickens, so it's pretty good size. It can be a pretty good.
So it feeds the school too, or eggs.
What it does, yes. What it does, we use some of the eggs for protein in the school. Some of the eggs are sold, and some of the eggs are given to needy people in the community. And then as the layers get older, then the meat is used in the same way.
Right.
So it's a key ingredient in the protein for the students and for those in the community that there's very little or no protein in their diet. So that's there. We have a pig farm where's another. It was another means of raising pigs, selling some pigs, but also using the meat. We have a tree farm, and when you say a tree farm, so eucalyptus trees grow very quick.
Yes.
And what we take forever to grow, maybe in about 7 years, we can grow a tree at the usable size. So we have, in the tree farm, we have 7 plantations that every year we can get a harvest. And that harvest is used, they'll use them for what we would call a hydropole. Right. They would use them for staging. What they would use for staging is very different than what we would use here in Canada for staging.
Yes.
So it can be sold for that. Then it can be used for firewood, the remainder.
Right.
So that's another one. And then we have a brick making.
So these trees, are they looked after by the people on the...
Yep.
Right.
we employ, with the teaching staff and the others, there's about 30 to 35 individuals that are what we say employed or make a living from being teachers, working within the school system or working
And
within
some
the
of
feds.
those are not funded from here at all.
No.
The organization there
Yeah.
funds them.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but that was the key when we started, to see if we could get some things going, that all of a sudden one day we're not in the picture anymore.
Right.
That on the other end, they have a lot of the basics to support themselves. So that was always a key, because
But it still requires funding from here
oh yeah,
at this point.
every year we do basic funding for needy children. We do basic funding we supplement teacher salaries. So when we say supplement teacher salaries, the teachers get a portion of their teacher salary through government funding. Even there they can get,
Okay.
because this is a registered school.
Right.
So they can get some, but we supplement that.
Okay.
A fairly decent supplement, their teacher salaries. We send the students to university. We pay their tuition. We pay we rent their, what we would call an apartment, but someplace for them to live while they're going to university.
Can you break down the need of what we would need to be sending from here on a monthly basis, or can you? Does that change day after day, year after year, month after?
John, you and I talked about this different times. The basics doesn't change.
Right.
The basic support, but many times during the year, there's always something needed. And I'll give you a very good example of that. Through the COVID pandemic here,
Yes.
it was just recently, and it was a while ago, but just recently again, all of a sudden, there was a real need for some food, because everybody was basically where we ended up. Everybody was told to stay home, don't go out.
But the government didn't give them.
But the government didn't give them anything. So what we done is we sent enough money, twice now. First time we sent enough money to buy about 15,000 pounds worth of the basic foodstuffs that are needed just to have a basic meal. And we done roughly the same thing here a couple of months ago again.
Right.
And James and his wife, they both ended up in the hospital in severe condition with COVID. And when you go to the hospital there, you either pay or you
go
home.
Right.
And so that was, so these types of things, if there's a need, like recently there's been a need to upgrade what we call the cafeteria. We can't visualize, their cafeteria and our cafeteria are two very different things.
Yes.
And so there's always needs.
Right.
I don't want to get into dollars and cents.
Right.
And like you and I talked many times, this whole thing today is we're doing this not to say, hey, we need somebody here to support Uganda. What we're doing this for is to broaden people's minds so that they realize that we all have a responsibility to get involved in when we look outside our own comfortable areas here in Canada. It doesn't take much to sign up to support a child someplace.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be through Miramichi-Uganda, but someplace in the world very quick you can find an organization where you can support at least one child.
Yes.
Eh?
Yes.
And
Yes, with half the world going to bed hungry.
yeah. And today, that's why we're talking here. What we're talking about is look at what the potential is.
Yes.
If you want to get involved,
Yes.
and if a church wanted to get involved or a group wanted to get involved, look at the potential.
Right.
But as an individual, it's very easy to get involved to make a difference in a life.
Right.
Eh?
Yes, very much so.
That's where we are with all of this.
Right. So if anybody wants to, they can support Miramichi-Uganda, but that isn't the purpose of our interview today.
That's not the purpose of the interview at all. It's just so people can see the potential. People can understand that hey, what we have here in Canada, we're in pretty good shape.
In spite of all our complaining, we're probably the wealthiest people on earth.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
so do you have more stats? Is there things that we didn't cover that you'd like to cover?
Oh yeah, we built. Once you get outside, if we look at the map and we see Kampala in Uganda, Kampala is a city.
Pretty big city, isn't it?
Pretty big city.
Yeah.
But once you get outside the city, we can't visualize it here. But then you come back into places where there's no power. Places where people live in mud huts, and that's when we're dealing with Nakatokolo. That's what we were into. So about 20 years ago,
they're actually living in mud huts.
Yeah. What we call mud huts. They make one of the things we just touched on very quick and went by it is their brick making.
Right.
We make bricks out of a mud that's available.
Right.
And then those bricks are made to build 1-room or 2-room little buildings to live in.
They're not the nice finished brick that we have, but kind of like a block.
No. Stewart Scott from Sunny Corner was visited him one time, and Stewart was sitting in one of the little houses, and there was a trench running across through the center of the house, and he asked what was that for. And they said, well, when the rains come, when the water comes in that end, the trench is to take the water out that end.
I've seen that.
So that's, so when we're visualizing, sometimes when we mention a house, how we would visualize a house, very different. So
very different.
It's very different. And Scripture tells us very clear that Christ said, what you do unto one of the least of these, you've done unto me. James said, pure religion is to take care of widows and orphans in their distress.
Yes. Now, does James tell us sometimes that there are needs that he can't meet, or is it pretty much sustaining the way it is?
James every now and then has some things, but anything that's a real need, we try our best to meet it. I think one time this church was involved in, we sent 600 malaria nets.
Yes.
Remember that time?
There are more people dying of malaria in the world than almost any other disease.
And malaria nets are very important because we say a child needs an education. But here in Canada, one of the things, if you have a sick child home and you send them to school to get an education, they probably don't do very well in school.
Right.
So one of the key things was with the malaria nets was to protect the children when they were home sleeping.
Yes, because like you said earlier, they can't afford a window.
No.
So the mosquitoes come in and they're sleeping and they wake up sick.
Yep. So those are some of the things. We always provide them with the community where the school is with a Christmas party. But their Christmas party is a little different than ours. When I was a young boy, we had a meat man that had a truck, and he had a big box in the back of the truck, and he opened it up, and he had all the meat in there. There was no fridge or anything. It was the daily meat run. Yeah. Well, at the Christmas party, what they have is a few animals butchered, and the meat's all laid out and on plastic, and it's divided up. Wow. Some sugar and maize. So our visuals of what we have and what they have, and when we talk about a Christmas party for them. Right. But at their Christmas party, one thing is very important to have for them, that the children all have a can of soft drink. Well, that might be their only one in the year. Yep. So how are we going to wrap this up? What would you want to say that we haven't discussed yet? How are we going to wrap this up? Yeah. I've always had a passion for this.
Yes.
My passion, and I guess it's always just been ingrained in me that I don't even think twice about this. Because too many times I've heard over the years, wow, you're going to have to prove it to me that this is really happening.
Right.
No, I don't need anybody to prove it to me. It's fact.
Oh, yes.
There's too many people that went someplace and come back. It's absolute fact. And every time I look at what I have, one morning, very early, one Sunday morning, I sat in front of the computer. And I put down in a 2-hour time frame what I had. I get out of a dry bed.
Yes.
I went to a refrigerator. I done this, I done this, I done this, I done this, and I done this. And when it was all said and done, then I wrote down with a child that was actually had no place to stay, that had to stay in the school that morning.
Yes.
Got up off a wet mat, laying on the floor, waiting for somebody to give him a basic meal. And if he gets sick,
Too bad.
too bad. Because if you and I get sick, we go into a hospital and nobody's asking us for money.
Don't even say thank you when we leave.
We don't say thank you. If we're hungry, we can go to someplace in Miramichi that's going to feed us.
Yes.
And if we need clothes, we should have turned off the cell phone. And we need clothes, there's somebody in Miramichi that'll give us clothes.
Yes.
And these are the key things that we have to understand, and anybody listening to us has to understand. With everything we have, we absolutely have a responsibility to do something for those less fortunate. And I've always been my less fortunate is someplace else in the world.
Jesus said, as often as you do it
You've
to the
done-
least of these, my brethren.
You've done it to me.
Isn't that something?
Yep.
And so thank you.
You're welcome.
You
Thank
have
you.
opened a door today to open the eyes of many people that to stop. You know, somebody, I saw something the other day where somebody was asking, I'm going through a hard time, I'm bored, I don't know what to do. And I wrote back and said, find somebody to help.
Yep.
And that's what God would want us to do.
Yep.
Find somebody to help and go ahead and help them. Thank you.
Thanks, John.